Happy Mother's Day on Sunday to everybody. And today we got Bryan Clark from Vancouver, Canada. And for those of you who have been following the Facebook, you know that he responded to a message that uh, Todd Fellogy had put out there about wearing pink T-shirts and being short and being bullied. And I don't remember what Brian's response was, but it was something positive as usual. Um, and my response was that I expected Brian to show up in a pink T-shirt today. Well,
And it didn't happen.
he didn't happen. Well, close though. Todd's got his pink shirt on. Let me just give some work here. I got a little work to do. Participants. Go to the more. Okay. What is that? Okay. All right. Carrie, where are you, Carrie? You're in there. Oh, there you are. Oh, thank you. Multi-pin. There we are. Oh, okay, good. So anyhow, that happened, and then someone else chimed in on and piggybacked on to I think Clark's one there and said something about and who is this Bryan Clark? And someone else chimed in. They thought that he was a mentor to Plato and Aristotle and a number of other pearly wisdom type sentences. So we'll find out about that. You know, he doesn't look old enough to be a mentor to those people. But I do remember Todd had dogs before he had cats, and I think one was called Plato and one was called Socrates. So that might have some connection there. Okay. Anyhow, welcome, Brian. Brian, we're glad that you're able to make it.
Yes. No, this will be fun.
Yeah, it should be. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And speaking of fun, what is there any particular dance that stands out as being the most fun dance you're able to call?
Uh, there was a moment in time um, when I was calling at IPAC 2003, and it was Dave Wilson and I. We were doing a session in the A2 hall, and inside the A2 hall that year, there were, I think, 47 dancers from the Czech Republic, and the average age of them was about 20.
Oh, wow.
And they were all camping on site because they didn't have money for hotels, so they were camping on site. They were showering in the bathrooms at the school gymnasium. But they basically filled that hall along with all of the other German and Swedish dancers that happened to be there. And and there was really nothing that Dave and I could do to challenge these dancers. Like they were able to dance every single thing that we could pull off the top of our heads. And it was some of the most fun calling I've ever had to do. And one of the things that happened was Dave and I started to play with each other because we couldn't we were completely running out of choreography to throw at these people. So we started doing the typical things of playing um, get in, get out, and then we were doing a alternating calls and seeing how that goes. And then Dave started doing asymmetric get in, get out,
Oh,
where he would put them into something asymmetric, and then I'd get them out, and then I do the same thing to him. And then we started doing asymmetric alternating calls. And Dave turned the music off, and he said, "Okay, ladies, you do what I tell you to do, and the men will have to do what Bryan tells you to do." And so we called like that for a little while, and we resolved the squares. And it was just so much fun because the dancers were dancing everything we could call, and we were just doing some crazy stuff. And my understanding is that somebody out there does have an audio recording of it, and it would be really cool to see that and dance to it. Um, but yeah, somewhere out there, there's a recording. But yeah, that was probably the most fun I ever had calling.
Wow.
Um, so yeah, that
That does sound like fun. Holy smokes. And
yes.
di- were there breaks and were you able to talk to anybody?
Oh, at IPAC, no,
Yeah. No.
no. The dancers were constantly dancing. There's just enough time to disconnect your computer and walk over to a different hall. So
Okay.
you
Yeah.
really didn't have enough time to chat with anybody. Although they did have pretty long after parties afterwards, and you could spend some time chatting with people afterwards.
Oh yeah.
But as a caller at IPAC, yeah, you spend most of your time wandering around from hall to hall, and then you're calling for a bit, and then you have to wander to some other hall, and the dancers are constantly dancing the entire time. So it's not yeah, it's not a very social affair for the callers. The callers are pretty busy most of the time. And then the week before that, Dave was doing a caller school, which I attended, and I was sort of uh, just watching and participating with him. He had me do a session for them as well, um, and I did a session on square repair, so fixing squares while you're calling to them,
Oh yeah.
and that was one of the fun subjects that I talked to them about. But even that school was fun because he would show the dancers, or he would show the other callers. He'd put the dancers into a specific position, and then say, "Okay, now," and he would get each caller to attempt to get them out from that exact same position. And every single caller would try something, and so some callers would take 20 moves to get out. Some would take 15 moves to get out. Some would go as low as 10, and then at the end of it, he'd go, "Okay, Bryan, show them how to do it." And then I'd do it in about 3 moves. And they'd all go, "Oh, how did you know that?" Well, first of all, I had a lot of time to sit there and watch it. So I got to see the formation every time. So that was cheating. But the other thing was that's kind of how I do my site calling. I don't rely on um, standardized formations or standardized setups and have get outs for those things. I site call using a method I have referred to as the Bobby Fischer method, which is I'm able to see it, and I can see it within anywhere from 3 to 5 moves.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so it's like the way he would play chess. He could see within 12 moves whether he was going to win the game.
Wow.
Yeah,
What would be the strangest place you've ever called, or strangest people that you called to?
strangest place.
Yeah.
Um, Again, I'm not going to say it was strange, but it was probably one of the more interesting places. But it was kind of one of the most unique places to call. I got to do the Tech Squares weekend 2 years in a row, and it turned out that Bear Miller ended up getting sick, and he couldn't do his second weekend that he was doing there. So they asked me to fill in, and they knew I was available. They knew I was capable, so they brought me in. And so I did one weekend, and then I also did the weekend the year after, and that was fun. But it was strange in the fact that when I got there, um, the tables were all set up, and most of the dancers were sitting around playing board games. Because they're all MIT students or ex MIT students, and they all just love board games. They like their minds being challenged most of the time. And so not only were they there for the square dance, but they were board games. There were lots of it was lots of it was kind of different than IPAC. There was a lot of time to sort of sit around and chat with everybody, and so I got to know a lot of the MIT dancers, and they're a lot of very fun people.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But that was probably one of the most unique weekends. It was different than any other weekend I've ever done.
Yes. Certainly would be. Uh,
Yeah. And then on top of that, it was a plus weekend, but they did have sort of star tips after the plus dance, which went all the way from advanced all the way through C4. And then they finished off with a contra because you need that as a cleanser.
Yes. Uh, yeah, quite a different mindset for that sort of a thing. And
Hmm.
it's the same thing on the West Coast. If you go to like to Stanford and call for, I don't remember what that, oh, quad squares, I think they were called.
Yep. Yeah, the Stanford quads.
They read the list of calls and the definitions one week, and then the next week, after they've danced it that week, they pick up the next list and learn it.
Hmm.
Um, Anyhow, so let's go back in time, and before we get back
Yep.
into square dance sort of thing and all, let's talk about childhood. Did you have uh,
Yes, I had a
fun
childhood.
with? Oh, okay. That question's done. Um, it's time for someone else. Um, was it fun? What did you do as a
Uh,
kid?
I was pretty much a regular kid. I was playing soccer and hanging out with friends and going to school. And um when I got to around uh, 10 years old, my parents went out and they started learning how to square dance. And and then they found out that there was a local teen club in Burnaby, where I live, and they took me there. And so not only was it an opportunity for me to learn how to square dance, it was also a cheap place for them to drop me off and have me babysat for a couple hours. So
That
so
was
not
the
only, yeah, well, I'm pretty sure there were two intentions there. One was to get me to learn how to square dance, and the other one was to keep me out of their hair for a couple hours. Um, but yeah, it was fun. And what it allowed them to do was they started booking weekends where they would go off and do square dance weekends, and I would go with them, and I would be out on the floor dancing too. So instead of just being a kid off on the side playing with my toys, I would be out on the floor dancing with all the other dancers. So that's what happened from a very young age.
That's cool. That,
Yeah.
that was the end of normal. Um, no more normal childhood there. Um,
Well, and it was weird because I also did 12 years of martial arts training as well.
oh my.
I was a big Bruce Lee fan, so I did lots of martial arts training over the years. And so I was crazy about weaponry and anything that Bruce Lee did. I was very into that. Although by 1973 he had passed away, and I was born in 1970, so I didn't really get to have the heyday of his, but I got the after effects.
Hmm.
Um, but I was a really big fan, and so much so that when I was a teenager, I pretty much looked like Bruce Lee.
Oh my
I had
gosh.
the I had the 70s Bruce Lee haircut, and I had my aviators sunglasses that I would wear all the time. Um, Actually, they were my regular glasses, and they had a tint in them that made them look like sunglasses. So
Wow.
that was my regular look back then.
So, yeah, it
Yeah.
sounds like you had opportunity for a lot of girlfriends.
No.
No, boyfriends. I don't know.
No,
You
no,
know.
not that either. Yeah, no, 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 not a lot of the nice thing about the Teen Square Dance Club was the girl to boy ratio was 3-1, and sometimes 4-1. And so that was one of the real draws to for me to stick around the Square Dance Club, because I got like zero attention at school. But yeah, I was able to get attention at the Square Dance Club because they were always wanting a boy to dance with. They didn't want to dance together as girls. All the girls wanted to dance with the boys. So yes, I got attention at the Square Dance Club.
Okay.
So that was the reason for square dancing.
That sounds like a good reason to me. Uh,
Yeah.
did you ever get in trouble in school?
Um, well, I was when I was in the eighth grade, actually, sorry, ninth grade. Well, let's see. When I went to the eighth grade, my parents put me into a local private Catholic school. They figured it was going to be a better education and a better environment for me. However, I was in the public elementary school system, and all of my friends went to a different school. And when I went to the private Catholic school, although I knew some of the guys there, it was also an all boys school, by the way. So that sort of ruined school for me as well, because um, I was very much into girls. Um, but the but I went to the private school, and I didn't like it because it didn't feel like high school. Like we always thought that high school was going to be, you would have different classes every hour, and there would be different people in your class. Well, the way that they ran this school was they ran it like an elementary school. The only difference was they didn't have us line up and walk single file to the other classroom. The bell would ring, and we would all sort of go off to our lockers and grab our books, and then we'd go back to the other class, but we'd have all of the same students in the same class. So we didn't get to meet all of the other kids in the school. We basically had one class that we stuck around with the whole time. Whereas all of my friends, they were at the public school, and when they went from one class to another, they had a whole different set of kids in their classes. So they ended up meeting everybody at school. So it was a much better social environment than where I was. Also, the environment at the school wasn't such where they were teaching the subjects. They would basically say, well, open up your book and read from here to here and do these questions. And if you have any problems, come up to the front and talk to the teacher, and we'll go over your problems. Whereas I'm the kind of student where I kind of need the teacher to explain the things before we dive into them. And our teachers would never do that. They went with the assumption that the students who were there were already studious students, and I was not. I needed to have stuff explained to me.
Yeah.
So, so I ended up not liking the school, and so in doing so, I decided that I just didn't want to go there anymore. And there was a local computer store that was on the way to school, and I would stop there, and I was building Apple compatible computers with some guy at some random computer store rather than going to school, and I would skip out of school quite a bit,
Oh
and
my.
I ended up being expelled from St. Thomas More, and my parents were extraordinarily angry at me being expelled from the school. And it was only a couple years later that they changed their minds, because it turned out that the brothers at the school were the principal who had expelled me and my religion teacher in grade 8 were both sent back to Newfoundland to face charges because they were having a little too much fun with some of the younger boys at school.
Oh boy.
Now, admittedly, I wasn't one of them. And I had no idea that that was even happening at the school, which apparently it was. But yeah, I had never seen that side of things while I was there. So, but
Right.
apparently it was happening, and so yes, my parents were very happy that I wasn't at the school anymore.
Oh yeah.
Um, but yeah, so that was the trouble I got into at school, and so it wasn't big trouble. It was just that I wasn't attending, and therefore, if you don't attend, they'll kick you out.
Yeah. Yeah. Rather.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
And
well.
so it wasn't until I got into sort of the senior high school where I was excelled as a student, and the teachers that were there were much better
Okay.
and suited me much better.
So from that situation and your dancing as a kid, how did you transition into calling?
So as a dancer, when I was roughly around 11 or 12 years old, so probably about 3 years into square dancing, I was out on the floor and I was able to sing all of the singing calls that were being sung. The caller who was the caller for our club was Ray Brenzy, and he taught me to dance. And so he did a bunch of singing calls, and so essentially every singing call that he had in his record case, I knew how to sing it because he had used them often. And so not only did I know the songs, but also while he was pattering, it turned out I could figure out how he was going to resolve the square before he did.
Hmm.
And so I was already anticipating the resolve before he could call it. And so that's where my site calling resolution skills came from. So as a dancer, I was able to see that well out on the floor dancing, and so that's kind of where it came from. But the unfortunate part was, at 12 years old, I was too chicken to get up with a microphone and do any calling. They wanted me to because they could see that I had some kind of ability, but there was no way I was going to grab a microphone. I was just too chicken to do so. And it wasn't until I took a drama class in high school um, that all of that just melted away. And I said, "Oh, yeah, this is easy. I can get up in front of people and do stuff. That's no problem." And so when I was 17, that's when I got up with a buddy of mine, Chris Knowles, and we did our first singing call together. And from then on, I was just calling, and yeah, and I was doing patter and singing call just right off the top. So yeah, it was fun.
So after high school, then did you go on to further school, or did you just go right into the workforce?
So I went to Douglas College in New Westminster, and they had a computing program there because I wanted to get into computing, and I knew that's what I wanted to get into. But at the time, in computing, there really wasn't a lot of official college courses that you could take. So they intermixed it with a bunch of other courses that they thought would accompany computing, and most of them were accounting courses, and I just hated accounting, and I couldn't do it worth beans. Um, so uh, so taking these courses, I just got horribly bored, and I didn't do well. So I ended up dropping out in my first semester. And out of 5 courses, I was only doing 2 that were computer related. One was a WordPerfect course, which was just training me how to use WordPerfect, which was a simple word processor, which I didn't need to learn how to use, but they were teaching it anyways. And then another one was called VP Planner, which was the free version of Lotus 123. So it was a spreadsheet program that they were teaching. And so again, they weren't. It wasn't like they were teaching program or any courses that I wanted to learn. I wanted to learn COBOL or some kind of programming language or Pascal or anything other than what they were teaching me, but I didn't get any of that. So I ended up dropping out. So I did a bunch of random jobs. Like I delivered trampolines uh, and set them up. I worked at a company making fire screens for fireplaces. That was actually an interesting job because it was one of the first jobs I had that was computer related. Because I was using Design CAD to design them on a computer, and then I would cut them out using a CNC shape cutter with a plasma head.
Hmm.
So that was pretty fun. But it was also a very dirty job because you're spending most of your time around this plasma cutter and just cutting steel all day long. But it was fun because I was working in an environment with a bunch of other crazy individuals who didn't believe in political correctness, and so we did nothing but play jokes on each other. So it was good. We would uh, the welder. I would take the welder's ground and I'd put tape on it so that it wasn't actually grounded. And he told me that some people would put ketchup on his grinding belt, and so when he would step up to the machine and press the button, he'd get ketchup all over himself.
Oh,
And so I watched him, and what he does, or what he would do, is he would stand aside and wait for the grinder to start up and be at full speed before he'd stand in front of it. And little did he know that I was very tricky. So I took ketchup packets and I taped them to the guard, and so as this thing was spinning around, it took a little while to eat through the ketchup packets. So about midway through his grind, he ended up with ketchup all over him, and he had no idea how that happened. And so yeah, so we had a little bit of respect for each other,
jeez.
but it was fun.
This sounds like a good warning for none of us to call with you as a. Well, it doesn't sound like we'd win. Oh Lord, that sounds like fun though. Uh,
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, it was fun. It was character building. It allowed me to get a very thick skin. Nothing pretty much nothing bothers me. I can, you know, I can deal with most everything being thrown my way. So,
that's good.
so yeah, and it also sharpened my mind. I was able to come up with inventive ideas on how to deal with not only the coworkers I was dealing with, but creative ways of making things work at work. They bought a oh, what was it? It was a 100-year-old turret punch that they bought that they wanted to use to make parts for gas fireplaces. And this thing had a tape reader on it for for programming it. And so it was my job to figure out how to reprogram it using the computer. And I ended up doing a an RS-232 interface into the tape reader so that it was no longer being reading the tape; it was getting information directly from the computer.
Oh wow.
And I was able to program it that way. Interesting that it actually worked, but yeah, it was very fun. So it was a challenging job, but I wasn't making a lot of money at the time. Uh, and it was just a weird job to have. But of course, during all that time, I was square dancing and doing all of the martial arts. So,
So when did you start calling like for a club of your own or
um,
someone
I
else's
th
club?
I think I was probably about 20 years old when I started calling for a club. One of the local callers was having he had cancer, and he was in the hospital, and he was not doing well, and he had an advanced club, and I was one of the only callers in town that was calling advanced, that had free time. And so they asked me if I would call for his club, and I said sure. And then he had passed away, and they just asked me to continue on, and I said sure. So I continued on. But yeah, it was definitely a weird time, because the club was working together with another club, and the dancers were going back and forth between the two clubs to learn advanced, and they would tell me which which call they learned that week from the other caller. And then it was my job to do the exact same workshop, or actually the workshop the way I do it, which is different than the way the other guy did it. But nonetheless, they got the same calls, and so that way they got to have 2 nights, a couple days apart from each other, where they could then learn the same calls. And so they actually became pretty good dancers because of it, because not only were they getting opinions from two different callers, but they were dancing twice a week for the learning the advanced program. So it was
Oh,
pretty good. But at the end of that program, the club executive came up to me and said, "Well, we've got a few of the dancers that we have here. They're very weak, and we want to sort of weed them out. Do you think you could call a little bit harder, and maybe they'll get discouraged and they'll stay home?"
gee.
And I said, "Are you sure you want to do that?" And they said, "Yeah, yeah, we think that's a good idea." So I went ahead and did that because, again, my understanding at the time is you're the caller, you're the one getting paid by the club, and you do what they say. And I was young, and I didn't really have a lot of experience with that kind of thing. And so I went ahead and I started calling a little bit harder. And what was interesting was the dancers that were having trouble, they actually got better, and the ones who weren't having trouble started to hate the fact that I was calling a little harder, and they stopped coming. So the opposite thing happened. And then the club decided that they were going to blame me because I started calling harder. And I said, "Well, hold on, you guys asked me to," and and so I ended up quitting the club, uh, for that reason. I said, this is enough. I'm not going to be blamed for this, and I ended up quitting. And unfortunately, the club shut down because there was nobody available to fill in after I left. So yeah, and then that group of dancers went to go dance with the other caller.
Oh, gee.
And then 3 years after that, he retired because he was aging out. So, and that club no longer exists anymore. So, yeah, it was kind of a weird time, and you sort of get a certain reputation. But around the same time, I was also doing beginner classes, and occasionally I was unemployed. So what I would do is I'd go to the local high schools and I would teach the square dance program during the winter. I'd go into the schools and with a $100 honorarium per day, I would teach all of their classes, and it was fun. The high school that I went to, they had what was known as an international baccalaureate program, and so they were basically a group of gifted students, and I ended up teaching them zero through mainstream in 1 week.
Oh, wow.
And it had everything to do with the fact that they were very studious students, and so I actually gave them printouts of the definitions and told them to study before coming to class the next day. And so we ended up going through all of the mainstream calls. They were dancing mainstream in 1 week.
Wow.
Whereas the rest of the students that were in the school, I think we were lucky getting through 15 calls in 1 week.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's a pretty big difference when you have students like that. So yeah, it helps when the students are very, very intelligent and actually do homework.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
so yeah, so those were the kind of things that I did when I was young. Um, and then I got older, and I ended up doing international calling, which was a lot more fun. Um, and I was training under Dave Stevens because he was coming up to Vancouver in the early 90s, because he had moved to Seattle. And so Bob and Vi Mackey out of Vancouver, they were our local C4 dancers, and they were tape leaders in Vancouver. And so they found out that Dave moved to Seattle, and they asked him to come up to Vancouver. And Ray was working with him, and I was working with Ray, and I ended up going to the Friday night dances and just thinking, wow, this guy's amazing. Dave was great. He had some of the greatest choreography I ever saw. And it turned out that they wanted Dave to work with Ray, um, so that Ray could get the same skill set that Dave had. The unfortunate part was that Ray was also very busy doing weekends out of town, so they didn't connect up as often as they should have, which was lucky for me because I ended up spending a lot of time with Dave. So after the dances on Friday nights, we would go to the local 24-hour restaurant, and we'd sit there for hours, usually about 4 or 5 hours, with the creamers out on the table, figuring out choreography, and he was essentially showing me everything. And that was probably the only time I got real formal calling education. And I would sit there and go, oh, that has a name? Wow, that's neat. Because I never knew what any of the names for these things were. I had figured out most of the stuff that is required for calling, but I never gave any names to it, like isolated site calling, certain types of resolution, that kind of stuff. Um, I had no idea. I didn't know the names of the formations, or well, I knew the names of the formations. I didn't know the standardized names, like zero lines or 1P 2P or what, all of the theory that everybody has, and that they teach in color school. And so every time I go to a color school and I see them teaching this stuff, I'm like, well, it's really neat, but um, I never used any of that stuff.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's a little weird to see it being taught. Um, but I understand why they're teaching it. It gives everybody a same frame to work from.
Yeah. Yeah. Gives you a chance to be able to converse uh, with terminology.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, so Dave was amazing. He taught me a bunch of stuff that nobody had ever taught me before. And one of the other things that Dave taught me was to go um, and become friends with Raleigh Weand out of Seattle, because Raleigh was the one who brought in all of the national callers into Seattle. And so I did. And so at the time, my girlfriend and I were going to Seattle once a month to go dance to all the national callers who went there. And we would stay at Raleigh's house, and I would converse with every single one of those callers. And so that's why I know pretty much everybody, because I got to meet them all at Raleigh's house, talking to them. I spent time with Sandy Bryant and Lee Kopman and Ann and uh, is it Bill Harrison, who you had a couple weeks ago?
Oh yeah.
I essentially got to meet everybody, like anybody that Raleigh brought into town. I got to meet them, except for Ron Libby, because Ron Libby and Raleigh apparently had a big argument, and he would never he would never host Ron. But I did meet Ron, because Ron was in Seattle. He just didn't stay at Raleigh's house. So, but I stayed at Raleigh's house, and then I went to the Ron Libby dance and fully enjoyed it. So
That's wild. You
yes.
missed me. I was out there a number of times, but
Hmm.
uh, yeah. Let's see if we move on here to a few other things. uh, what do you think is probably the most important thing to be a caller? Um, you might want to put it into a number of categories, but probably what's the first thing you think a caller you would want a caller to be good at to start with?
So one of the primary things that you need to do is be able to entertain. And everyone says, "Oh, well, you got to be a good singer." No, you don't have to be a good singer. You have to be able to entertain. Um, Lee Kopman, not a great singer. Was he an entertainer? Absolutely. Every time I danced to Lee Kopman, I was fully entertained. Some of the things that he would say while he was calling would keep me in stitches while I was dancing. And so he was able to entertain the dancers. Um, on that list for me is choreography. I came from the teen square dance competition. So for me, I was trained to square dance as though we were dancing in the Olympics. So when I go to a dance, if I see something from a caller that I find extraordinarily interesting, that will make it so that I will go back and dance to them again. And and those are the kind of things that I'm attracted to when I see what other callers do, because I'm to me the choreography is what does it for me. Um, but primarily it is entertaining. You have to entertain the dancers. You have to be able to uh, keep them engaged the entire time, and that's tough. That's really tough. And then the third thing I like to see is a good teacher. And they need to know, not only do they need to know the material, but they need to know how to explain it to the dancers in a way that they're going to understand it. And that's a whole other different piece uh, of our activity that most people don't wrap their heads around. They just say, "Oh, well, if I explain it, then they'll get it." And it's like, no, you kind of have to show it to them. You have to explain it to them. You have to let them dance it. You have to do a combination of all three of those before any of them get it. And it's worthwhile making sure that the dancers are understanding what you're doing. Um, so yeah, it's a pretty big list of things that we have to do. And then on top of that, we also need to be sound technicians. We need to be businessmen. We need to be able to um, be leaders in the organization, and be able to tell other people how to do things. And also the last thing that I think is very important is share your knowledge and pass on to others. One of the things that I appreciated most out of joining Collar Lab was finding out how collaborative they were. When I went there, it was one of the best environments in the world for me, because I got there and everyone was willing to share their information. Nobody was hiding, what they did. They were like, well, this is what I do. And, it may not be for you, but this is the way I do it. And then you go to some other caller and they'll say, well, this is what I do. And as a caller, you can actually get to see what other people do, and you can learn from them, or not learn from them, or learn that you don't want to do that, whichever. But you sort of get that idea that it's an opportunity for you to see things in a different light in a collaborative environment, and that's kind of what I enjoy about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really good. Yeah, I think that things have changed over the years tremendously in terms of sharing. Uh, and I think as callers, we all we share because we want to sort of show off. Look what I thought of.
Hmm.
And it's fun to deal with the newer callers because they come up with, they said, "Do you know if you square through four hands, you'll be facing a corner?" So, wow, okay. Anyhow, yeah. So do you still square dance? And if so, what, where, and why?
Well, the last time I square danced was last weekend. I danced one tip at the teen square dance competition.
Wow.
Um, because that was held last weekend in Seattle, or actually in Auburn, just outside of Seattle. And yeah, it was fun. But again, I'm very picky who I dance to, and you'll know this because I went and I danced to Todd Feligy when he was in Vancouver. Hi, Todd. Um, but yeah, I if I'm gonna spend my hard-earned money going and dancing to a caller, which by the way I also do. I know there's a lot of callers out there who constantly say, "Oh well, if a caller comes to my dance, he doesn't have to pay," and so on and so forth. It's like, no, I insist. I always insist on paying to dance to callers, because if I'm going to steal their material, um, I'm going to pay for it. And but yeah, so that's the way I like to do it. I go out and I pay for my square dance weekends, and uh, if I can, I'll dance as much as I can to some of the best callers I can dance to. I don't do a lot of dancing locally in Vancouver, because most of the dancing in Vancouver is very vanilla, and it's I hate to say this, but it's just not worth my time. I don't like dancing to it, and it bores me. And yeah. The only one that I sometimes dance to in Vancouver is Steve Edlund, and I just find that he's very inventive, um, sometimes. Um, but but he's now putting a lot of work into what he's doing, and that's good. So yeah, so yeah, I don't mind that. And I have some friends, a friend of mine, Krista Baird, who calls locally. She was doing an SSD class, and I wandered over to her club and popped my head in just to see how things were going. And I danced there a couple of times, but that was mostly to visit her and see how she was doing. But yeah, I don't do a lot of dancing in Vancouver. I'll do most of my dancing out of town if I can.
Hmm. What do you do in your downtime? Like to de-stress or have hobbies or whatever?
Well, right now, since I'm not doing any calling, technically I retired back in 2018. I'm going out and doing karaoke a lot. I go out to the local bars, and I sing for a bunch of drunk people. Because I don't drink myself, but most of the karaoke is out at bars and pubs locally. And so I go out there and I order, a nice little bar meal, whatever it is, chicken wings or whatever, and sit there for an hour or two and sing a bunch of songs and then go home. So that kind of gets me out of the house.
Oh yeah. So,
Yep. Or I go to movies. I go to lots. I go to every movie.
oh wow.
Yep.
That's it's one of my downfalls. I don't go to I watch them. They're 10 years old or 20 years old. Then I realize what I've missed.
Oh
Uh,
yes. No, I see pretty much all of them when they come out.
so retired from calling, sort of.
Well, what happened was my son moved in with me full time when he was 15 years old. Um, and so at that point, I ended up being a full-time father. So I couldn't just take off for a week and fly to Europe and do a weekend of square dancing and then fly home like I was doing. I because in the last weekend that I had done was a weekend in Bratislava. Uh, there was a nice fun weekend that we did there. Actually, I did with Bryan, who's also here on the call. He'll be here. I think you're talking to him next week. Um,
yes.
but that was amazing fun. That was a great weekend. We had a lot of fun with that weekend, and I uh, I kind of knew that then it was going to be my last weekend because my son was already planning on moving in with me full time, and so I stopped accepting bookings after that, and I stopped paying for my licenses locally, and I dropped out of Color Lab, and so yeah, I'm not really doing anything. And then when COVID came up, all of these Zoom things showed up, and so I can do all the Zoom stuff from home, and it doesn't affect my parenting at all. And I thought it would be interesting to participate in these, and so I have been for the past year or so, or past 3 years, I guess.
Mhm.
Yep,
Super.
yep.
Do you see yourself getting married again?
It's a possibility. I didn't think it was, but it's a distinct possibility. It could happen.
Uh-huh.
Um, but I'm not like some of the other callers. I'm not going over to Europe and finding some young girl and marrying her and bringing her back here. Um,
Wonder who you're talking about.
well, you could swing a cat and figure that one out. There's
Yes.
there's a there's a few. Uh,
Yes.
um, you know, yeah, but
Yeah. Enough said.
yeah, but yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that wasn't my kind of thing. Um,
Yeah.
not that there aren't lovely ladies in Europe, but um, I'm really not into the whole long distance kind of thing at first, and then whatever. Yeah, I don't know. It just that doesn't work for me. But yes, I will. I'm actually actually working on somebody right now, but we'll see how that goes. But she's
Oh,
not a dancer.
that's okay.
Yeah.
That's
So
okay. Nothing wrong with
so we'll see
that.
how that goes. We'll see
Super.
how that goes.
Good luck with that. If you could go back and give your 18-year-old self a piece of advice, what would that be?
Wow.
Yeah.
Um, hmm. Um, maybe a little less asymmetric stuff. It's not as appreciated as I like to think it is. I find it's interesting and I have fun doing it, but there are some dancers out there who just don't like it. Although maybe not the asymmetrics, maybe the 5/8 stuff. Maybe I can cut back on that. Yeah.
Well, I guess you're one of the few callers that we could trust if you say, um, what if they do a single hinge a quarter?
Yeah, that's one
Yeah.
16th of a turn.
Yeah, that's what I always thought. So I guess you're that kind of caller. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, hinge a quarter. That has controversy. If you say center zoom, that's another controversy.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
we were at the teen festival this past weekend, and the mystery caller decided to in the mysteries he had all four boys in the middle, and he said boys zoom, and he wanted a normal zoom. But in fact, the kids who were dancing in front of me, they did a pass through because they were doing what they were being told,
Uh-huh.
and and they broke down because they couldn't dance the next call, and so it was a mistake of the mystery caller. But it just I didn't vet the tape, so I have no responsibility there.
Same Brian as Boy Scootback.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, and the girls just
Now,
stand there.
now that's perfectly okay if you say boys scoot back, girls dodge. That's
Yes,
fine,
yes.
and it's perfectly okay. But if you just yeah, you want to call out the calls correctly. So yeah, so there's lots of uh, different things that go on that are irritating that happen every now and then.
Uh, so, on the list of things, have you ever done? Uh, I can't find my list, so I should remember it anyhow. Have you ever ridden a horse?
I have
Much?
when I was younger and a lot lighter, certainly. I wouldn't dare do it to a horse now. That would be dangerous to the horse.
Uh, ever jump out of an airplane?
I have.
Oh,
Yes.
you weren't
Yes,
with
I did. I
you
did
weren't
a
with
I
Guy,
did a
were
static
you?
li- I did a static line jump
Oh yeah.
out in Abbotsford. There was a group of us at I was working at a car dealership, and basically all of the lot boys at the car dealership decided that we'd go out one weekend and do a static line jump, and we did. And we were at 24, I think it was like 2,400 feet,
Yeah.
and you just jump out of the plane, and it pulls your chute for you as you jump out. So it's not a very difficult thing to do. And you have to do 10 static line jumps before you can do a free fall at 7,000 feet. So
At 7,000?
yeah, because you can skydive at 7,000, and so you can have a few seconds of actually falling before you pull your own chute.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, but if you wanted to skydive, you would have to go well, you'd have to go tandem with a instructor, and I didn't want to do that. I want to go by myself. So so I just jumped out of the plane. But we only did the one jump. I didn't do any more than that. And what was embarrassing at the bottom was, although I was making up for the fact that I was coming downward, I wasn't making up for the fact that I was going forward. So my feet hit the ground, and rather than sort of running out of it, my knees bent, and I then hit my face on the ground because
Oh,
because I wasn't paying attention to the instructors when they said you kind of have to walk out of it. Um, Instead, I did a face plant. It was good, and I think my sister got it on video somewhere.
okay.
But yeah,
Yeah, I guess you live and you learn, huh?
correct.
Uh, do any
But I'm
scuba
but I'm
diving?
still alive.
You,
I haven't
yeah.
done any scuba diving. I've
No.
done snorkeling, but not scuba diving.
Uh, um, so you were in drama in school. So have you done any plays or anything? Have you looked into that?
I did. I was in the high school play. We did a musical called School, spelled Skool, and it was fun. I was the only one who didn't have a solo in the entire play. However, unfortunately, fortunately, I was there to show the other singers how to sing their solos. The music teacher, who was the one who was running the music on the play, she found out fairly quickly that I could sing, and so she would have me demonstrate for the others how to sing their songs. It was just that when I was cast in that part that didn't have a solo role, but I was there accompanying the singers the entire time, so it was okay. It was fun. But
You play a musical instrument?
when I was a kid, I took 5 years of Royal Conservatory piano,
Oh yeah.
and I played by ear. I never really got the hang of reading the notes and playing at the same time. So my teacher would play the song for me before she left, and then I would listen to it, and then I would go home and I'd play it the same way that she played it, and then I'd go back the next week, and she thought that I was playing the song because I was reading the notes, and I wasn't. I was just playing what she played. And there were a couple times when I would play the song, and she said, "Oh, well, you played that wrong," and I go, "Well, that's how you played it last week." So
Ooh.
so yeah, I never really could sight read the music.
Yeah.
which is unfortunate because I do like playing piano. It was fun, and I would love to be able to read the music and play at the same time, but I never really sat down and concentrated on that.
Oh, okay. Well, one last question for you before I open it up to anybody else.
Yep.
If you could be remembered for one thing, what would it be?
I think in my case, it's the it's the entertaining, crazy choreography that I sometimes do. Um, I put a lot of thought into that stuff. It's not that I pre-write any of that stuff. Um, usually, my process is pretty easy. I'll sit down with a call and I'll figure out everything that I can do with that call and where they all start from and where they all end. And that's about it. I don't actually write modules. I don't sit down and try to figure out modules or flow modules or anything. I will figure out what I can do with each individual call, and then as I'm site calling, when I see a situation, I have instant recall where I can pull back and say, okay, well, if I did this, I could do this neat thing, and it may not resolve immediately, and in a lot of cases, sometimes it does, where the dancers will be in a particular position, and I'll say, do this, 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 and this, and then all of a sudden they're like within steps of their corner or the steps of their partner, and sometimes it's lucky, and sometimes it's by design, but yeah, that's just the way that I do things, and there was one dance that I did in California where I was calling out in the A2 hall, and one of the C2 dancers came up to me afterwards, and they go, "Oh, you've got a really, really big database of getouts." And I said, "No, I don't." And he goes, "What do you mean?" I said, "Everything I did out there, I did off the top of my head. I would call for, maybe 30, 40 seconds, maybe a minute, and then a little bell would go off in my head, and I would say, okay, time to resolve, and I'd look at the floor and match people up and get them home, and that's it. And or if I saw something, like if I say, okay, well, if I called a swing through, that's a right and left grand. Or if I want to be fancy, you know I'll say, was it spin chain, is it spin chain the gears, don't turn the star, which is equal to a swing through. um, and then a right and left grand. So it's those things are just sort of off the top of my head, and I just see them and I just call them. So yeah, so that's where a lot of it just comes from.
Oh,
Um, so yeah, so it's a lot of the creative things that I've done, and I've done some of the stuff for the teen festival, and a lot of that stuff I wrote, and that stuff's fairly interesting. The one of the ones that I'm most proud of is the 7 consecutive touch quarters alternating hands beginning with a right, and the call looks like a palindrome. So it starts with 2 people in the very center of the square, so it goes 2 people, 4 people, 6 people, 8 people, 6, 4, 2, and then you're done. And it looks very neat, but it's a very difficult setup. It's a really weird setup, but once you get them out of it, or at least the way that I wrote it, it ends up putting everybody at home with an all 4 couple slide through,
hmm,
and yeah, it was fun. It was fun doing those kind of things. So yeah, I like putting that kind of stuff together.
very good.
And I think the one that I mentioned to you earlier before we started this conversation was in one of the last mysteries I did. I did a spin chain through to home, and it's like a phantom spin chain through. And so you do like a phantom spin chain through and have the boys half circulate, and so it ends with a push cast 3/4, and then everybody's at home. So it's kind of fun. So
So that's two things, two takeaways you all have gotten today from Clark, Bryan. That it would be interesting choreography. So you can find his email on Vic Cedar's database. And the other thing is, tell your friends and neighbors that he's got one on the hook right now, but he's open to suggestions. Marriage opportunity. You could do like the caller up in Ontario. Oh, somebody remember his name. neatest guy. He was like Ed Wynn, the comedian, and he would advertise in the local paper, looking for female partner, must have Bolton worms.
Nice.
So anyhow, it's the people we meet along the way. Each one of us is a librarian. Try to start if you haven't done it yet. Start journaling your history. For some of you, it's going to take reams and reams. I'm not mentioning names like Brian or any Brian. Um, it'll take a lot of paper, a lot of bits of your computer, but try to do it because there's an awful lot of interesting history of who you've met, how you've met them, how you've interacted with them. You're a library unto yourself, but your library is one book of you and scads of books of all the people we meet and play with. So uh, try to think about doing some journaling on that. Start writing your autobiography. I know some people say, "Oh, I'm not interesting." Let someone else judge that. These people wouldn't be on here watching you uh, if they didn't find you interesting somehow or another. And we get lots of hits on YouTube. So obviously, there's a lot of people that are, you know, I mean, we have a few people like Eileen from Australia who stays in bed throughout our interview show. Um, but it's not the best timing in the world for everybody around the world. And I will look towards scheduling some of these interviews at a different time, perhaps even in the week or in the day, to try to get some people from Asia, for instance, and some of the more people that are normal from Australia who would be up at a proper time. Um, and I'm always open to input. If you have ideas of questions for me to ask that you don't think to ask or don't want to ask, shoot me an email. Um, I've gotten some great input, questions to ask, questions not to ask. Yeah, some are too sensitive. So, I don't want to have anybody feel um, off put by anything. So, definitely. So, next week we've got the other Brian, Brian Hotchkiss from Australia. And he actually, I don't know if that's pajamas, tops, or if he's actually dressed this morning. I'm
That
looking forward.
that's how he regularly dresses.
Yeah, just the tops. It's like a newscaster. Don't, I don't own pants. Okay. Um, so anyhow, we've got a great lineup of callers coming up. I just signed for June 11th, I believe. Ken Burke and Tim Teal, who are two nutty guys that work together fantastically. So that should be a lot of fun too. They're all fun, that's for sure. And yeah, you know, I get a kick out of this. I don't treat it too seriously. I hope, but it's just been meeting people and staying in touch with people. So thanks for tuning in. Anybody got a question for Bryan Clark? You can pick his brain now. No, they don't
I
want to
think
do
he
that
could
touch a
probably
corner
share
thing.
some of that interesting choreography with us, Joe.
Pardon me?
I think he could share some of that interesting choreography that he was talking about with us.
Yeah,
I'm always, I don't call it, I know Brian called it stealing, but I don't call it stealing. I call it researching.
yeah, yeah.
I'm
Well,
always looking to research choreography from clever callers.
I remember when we were working together in Bratislava, I was doing a session that was an entire A1 session of asymmetric dancing. And I remember watching all of the European callers who happened to be there. They were all up in the upper deck watching, trying to figure out how it was I was resolving each of the figures. And then also realizing that I didn't have any cards. I wasn't reading anything. I was cycling the whole thing. So that was fun. But that was something that I had learned years ago from Dave Stevens and also from Dave Wilson for how to resolve squares. And it doesn't matter how they're arranged. It just is a fun method of getting everybody home. But as far as some of the choreography, if you do a search on YouTube for I think it's PNTSDF, which is Pacific Northwest Teen Square Dance Festival, and you look for just PNTSDF Mystery or Super Senior Mystery, you will find a bunch of the stuff that's been recorded, and you can see it being danced, or at least attempted to be danced. So the I think it's the 2009 mysteries are the ones with the 7 consecutive touch of quarters, alternating hands beginning with a right, and the 2015 Super Senior is the one that has the spin chain through to home. So those are the ones that are out there, and then within all of those mysteries, there's a bunch of different things that you can look at that are all very interesting. And of course, not all of them are me. There's a bunch of them from many other different callers who have done them over the years. And as I had mentioned to Joe, one of the ones that impressed me the most was one of the simplest things, and it was square through, but on every hand swing through. Oh, okay. You want me to put it in chat? Okay, here we go. NTSD, yeah. So put that into YouTube and you'll find a whole bunch of stuff to look for. And if you want to look for the ones that specifically have me, you can also add my name on there and you'll probably find it. So yes, it's definitely fun. And so there's a bunch that are out there to look at.
Okay.
Oh, Carrie has a question.
Okay. Go ahead, Carrie.
You're on mute.
I think you implied that you called contra like as a wind down at the end of a day, end of an evening. Do you ever call hash contra?
I don't call contra at all. The contras that were being done by a contra prompter that was brought in specifically for that time. And I think even Clark Baker did a couple of them himself. So, and he was attending at the weekend.
But not hash. Only traditional contra where you do the same thing over and over.
Correct.
Again.
Yes.
I mean, I can do contra like once or twice a year because I just get too bored.
Exactly. Yeah, that's why I never really got into contra. I like the way they dance it, but yeah, you're doing the same thing over and over again.
Do American contra dancers ever do triple minor contra?
I don't know.
I know they do Beckett and other things, but I've never heard of the triple minor.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, now we're talking about things I have no idea about.
There was a caller from, I think, Nebraska, and I can't remember his name. He was Francis Zeller, and he did contras, and he did a thing at Caller Lab once called challenging the challenging the contras, and he had all of us challenge callers up there twisting our head all around in circles because he was doing fantastic things in contra material. You just had to know the concepts involved. Oh, Francis was from Kansas, it says. Okay. Aaron.
By the way, Aaron Byers knows everything.
Oh, okay.
And everyone.
Yeah. Francis was a
Francis who?
Zeller. Zell. I don't know if it's AR or ER.
In Canada, it would be ER.
Oh, yeah.
Because we have a store called Zeller's.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, it's basically the Canadian version of Target, or as I call
Yeah,
it, Target.
Target. Yes, yeah, that's our French version. Uh, yeah, Francis was an interesting caller. Very, very fun. A lot of fun. Um Not a challenge caller by any means, but still did some interesting things with basic choreography. So, but that's true of so much of our legends. Um,
Yes.
so, at any
Well, and
rate,
and as I said, the best advice I ever got was to go out and dance to the best callers you can find, and as Brian says, research.
yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's not necessarily the callers that we learn from. It's many times the dancers that we discover, especially in teaching, uh, new ways of doing things. And because someone will come up and say, you know, that call you just taught me, can I do this? Can I do that? Blah, blah. Um, it opens your mind and your eyes to other ways of doing things. Anybody
Hmm.
else have any questions for Brian? Okay, not at the moment. Okay,
Nope.
so so like I say, next week we've got Brian Hotchkiss. Um, oh, here we are. Brian says this is the first time I've joined one of your sessions and I've got the timing wrong. I thought it started at 7 a.m. my time, but it was actually 6 a.m. Yeah, what's your point?
He's concerned about next week. He doesn't think he'll be able to make it up on time.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not sure how I'm going to look bright tomorrow, next week when we have it.
Well, stay up at night. Don't go to bed. You know, callers don't need sleep. I remember when we, you know, in the heyday back in the 70s and 80s, on our festivals and conventions, we would call all day and party all night. You know, you get to sleep maybe for 2 or 3 hours at the most, and we drank a lot to
When,
boot.
I,
So,
I
when
only
I'm
drink
uh,
this.
well, yeah, me
when
too.
I'm
No,
going traveling, Joe, and I have to get up early in the morning, like 4 o'clock or something like that, to get down to Sydney to catch a flight. Then I will stay up all night and sleep on the plane.
yeah,
But I'm not very bright in the morning. I'm not a morning person, not an early morning person.
this is going to be good next week.
I got to warn you. You might have to do a lot of the talking, and I'll just nod my head.
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah,
Hannah and Lars know what I'm like early in the morning.
that's okay, as long as you don't fall asleep on us.
Well, back in 2018, that was the first time I ever got to work with Brian, and he's such a gentleman, such an amazing caller. It was fun. It was fun to work with him. It was great.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. I enjoyed your presentation as well. We didn't get to see all that much of each other because we were both working at the same time in different halls.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. The magic of working in Europe as a caller.
Yeah, it's different. And nobody had told me ahead of time before I ever went that they don't stop dancing. I had changed my record from, you know, the singer to the next pattern. I was going to go down and socialize, and I turned around and they're all looking at me like, and they're all squared up in different squares. I said, "Aren't you going to break?" And they said, "No." That was
Yep. No
I,
breaks.
I, I found that you needed to put in a written request in advance if you wanted to go to the toilet.
well, that's why got they've got special pants for that, you know.
I don't.
Okay, gang. Well, it's certainly been a great day. Uh, Glad to see you. We never did find out how Socrates and Plato, or what they found out from Brian, but I, maybe something to do with asymmetrical planetary observation, for all we know. Uh, Whatever it was, it would have been good. So, next week, same time, same place, and we'll be talking with Brian Hotchkiss.
All right.
Same time.
Thank you all for coming.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Brian. It was
Thanks.
good.
Thank you, Joe.
So much.